Welcome to the Purposeful MD podcast. As a physician, you've sacrificed so much of your life for other people, your patients, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. What would it feel like to spend time doing what you enjoy and to live without guilt? I'm your host, Dr. Laura Sutton, a family physician, certified coach, and business owner. If you're a medical professional on a journey towards your most purposeful life, a life with more time and energy, and ultimately more joy, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to another episode of the Purposeful MD podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about people pleasing. And this has been something that's been really challenging for me, especially early in my career. The most striking story that I can think of where I fell into this people pleasing tendency was when I was in the hospital getting ready to have my daughter. And I felt like I needed to take care of the people around me. Like I needed to be a certain way for the medical staff, for the nurses. And I think back to this and I think, I really should have been the one letting them take care of me. And yet I remember feeling like I needed to be a certain way to help to manage their emotions and their experience. And this is not something that is unique to me. I've talked to so many of you, so many medical professionals where people pleasing is just really ingrained in us from an early age. And it makes sense. We're rewarded for it when we're young. We're rewarded for pleasing our caregivers, our parents, and our teachers. And this continues even into adolescence and young adulthood, including our medical training. So when we're in college and medical school, if we pleased our teachers, if we pleased our professors and our mentors, and then in our medical training, our residents and our attendings, then we might get rewarded with the coveted recommendation letters, maybe from that one attending that you needed the recommendation letter from, or even rotation or internship opportunities. And these can have real consequences, good consequences, and good outcomes. And so our brains and our bodies learn that when we please people around us and we make other people happy, we get what we want. And just like any sort of reward system, that triggers our dopamine system, and then our bodies want more of it. We crave it. And that's why it can be really difficult to break that people pleasing cycle. Our bodies physically crave those rewards. And so we do the same behaviors to try to get to those same rewards. The people pleasing feels that it's safe in the moment. It's something that keeps us safe because it's something that we've done our whole life, and it kept us safe when we really relied on the care that the people around us would give and the rewards that they would give, whether that's something when we're younger, when we needed to please our adults so they would physically keep us safe. So the people pleasing still continues to make us feel safe, even as adults. But the cost is higher now because we're choosing people pleasing over full authenticity. And that can really have some drawbacks. And we'll get into that a little bit and we'll get into how to break some of those cycles. Because what happens when we continually please other people around us and we make other people available when they need us, we become depleted really quickly. We can't please everybody all the time. It is impossible to please everyone around us all the time. It's just not possible. We don't even know what people want. So, how do we know when we're pleasing them? And a lot of times we're trying to please strangers, probably more so than the people closest to us. And it takes energy. It takes energy that we may not always have to say no when honoring the requests of other people is not in our best interests. And so if we don't have that psychic energy, it becomes really, really hard to say no. But we know intellectually that we have to say no sometimes. We have to honor ourselves. We have to please ourselves before we please everybody else around us. We can't be everything to everyone, and we cannot honor every request that's made of us. But we might fear that the other person on the receiving end of our no will be angry or might reject us. And that gets into our safety and our survival mechanism. And, the other person might get angry. They might reject us in the short term, maybe even in the long term. But in my experience, both in my own personal life and in the lives of my clients who are medical professionals and who a lot of times struggle with this, a lot of times the other person on the receiving end will respect us for honoring ourselves and asserting our needs. And over time, the more we ask for what we need, the more we assert ourselves, the more we set those boundaries. And when we respond in a way when we meet our own interests, then other people will respect us for setting those boundaries. So then what that does is we're setting an example for people around us. We give other people permission to set their own boundaries and to honor their own interests over interests of other people. And this can be really, really impactful when we're in a position of influence. And if you're listening to this, you are in a position of influence. So whether we're parenting, whether they're leading a team or caring for patients, when we model that behavior of saying no or saying yes if we need to, but really honoring our best interests and not people pleasing, we're empowering other people along the way. The other thing that's been really important for me to learn in my personal and professional development is that other people's reactions. So when we act in a certain way, whether that's setting a boundary or honoring our own interests, not people pleasing, when other people react in a certain way, their reactions reflect their own boundaries or lack of boundaries. You are not responsible for other people's behavior or emotions. I'll say that again. You are not responsible for other people's behavior or emotions. Even though we know we can't please everyone all the time, or if people pleasing is getting in the way of what we want, it can be really difficult to put that into action. Because again, our bodies have learned via the dopamine reward system that people pleasing makes us feel good. So we want more of that. If we want to break the cycle, the first step is to recognize and become aware and acknowledge that this thought process and the people pleasing behavior is getting in the way. Just acknowledging that it's a barrier to us reaching our goal, whatever that goal might be. And then once we acknowledge it, then we can practice a different behavior. We can start with something small just to get our bodies accustomed to doing something different. So as you practice this, and we'll get into a little bit of practice later in the podcast, we might notice some strong emotions come up. We have to work through those. And if so, that's something that you're processing and working through, I encourage you to go back and listen to episode 5, where we talk about how to navigate through those. Because when we can navigate through that discomfort, then we just are that much more successful. And this is where working with somebody like a coach or a trusted advisor to support and encourage us can be really, really helpful. Let me tell you a few stories from my physician clients. So I was working with a physician client who was a successful, driven primary care physician, and one of her passions was volunteering and contributing to her church. So during our session, she shared some frustration that she had made a commitment to this project at church, but she didn't really want to be working on it. So I asked her why she'd committed to it, and she said, "Well, the priest asked me, and no one else wanted to do it." So her frustration centered around the fact that the project was due soon, and she was going to have to spend her entire weekend working on it when she was behind on charts and needed to catch up, and then somehow also spend some time with family and hopefully get in some exercise. I helped her to explore the thoughts that led her to volunteer for this project. And she said she felt obligated because she was asked to do it. She didn't know how to say no. She didn't yet know how to say no. Because she felt obligated, she wasn't looking forward to it, and that only increased her frustration. The project wasn't something that was meaningful for her. It was a low priority for her. And it was just a difficult situation all around. And it led her to wish she hadn't said yes when she was asked. She was expending a ton of time and energy on something that didn't really matter to her. And that time and energy could have been better spent elsewhere, like with her family, which was her number one priority. So she was struggling because she anticipated another ask from this priest coming up. And she thought that this also was going to be something she didn't want to do. So her brain was telling her that if she said no, the priest wouldn't respect her and would be mad at her. She had a strong friendship with this priest, so she was really concerned about what he might think. So I helped her to question that thought. And as she was talking, she had this insight that the priest, as a friend of hers, really wouldn't want her to be feeling so frustrated and so pressured. He'd want her to speak up for herself and say no when she needed to. He'd want her to set those boundaries. So we talked through some strategies to say no in a loving and kind way. And the one that we came up with together was, I'm not able to fulfill that request right now. So say it with me. I'm not able to fulfill that request right now. Now, if you're in a scenario like this and you want to go for the gold, You can offer somebody else who could help them. You don't have to, but you can. And if you feel a need to justify, again, you don't have to. You could tell the other person that you wouldn't be able to do the project justice. Again, you don't have to justify anything. Remember that no is a complete sentence. So once this client established a new boundary, she shared with me she was less guarded and more relaxed. Those were her words. And she was sleeping better because she was less stressed. So another one of my physician coaching clients who is a leader within his organization struggled with people-pleasing behavior and not being perceived as difficult by others on the team. He told me that he never says no, and he found himself double and triple booked with meetings on the calendar, one meeting running on his phone and another running on his computer. He knew intellectually he couldn't focus on either meeting, and the chaos was really getting in the way of him being as effective as he could. But yet he believed that if he declined a meeting or said he couldn't attend because he had a conflict, then he wouldn't be seen as a team player and he'd miss something important. So we coached together for him to realize that the status quo was not sustainable. He wasn't getting anything really accomplished the way he wanted to. And so we created some strategies to reduce that double and triple booking on the calendar. And once he worked through the people-pleasing tendency, he really gained a significant amount of time back in his day and his week. He was less stressed and he was able to make way more progress toward his goals than he ever thought was possible. So as you hear these stories, notice where people-pleasing is coming up for you. Notice how it feels in your body. Maybe you're feeling this as you're hearing the stories. Maybe you're thinking of a situation in your life where this is coming up. So notice the feeling in the body. It might show up as maybe a tightening of your neck and your chest, maybe your jaw's clenching or your stomach kind of feels a little sick. Notice that when you feel a desire to please others at the expense of yourself. So the awareness is really the first step. Notice if those moments are coming up where you can practice a different behavior. Maybe it's saying no to that extra patient being added to your schedule or the unpaid committee work or that last minute request to bring cookies to your child's school. It can be even something as simple as letting someone know of your preferences for which restaurant to go to or which movie to watch. A phrase like, "I'm not able to fulfill that request right now," can be really helpful. I want you to practice that. And as you practice, have compassion for yourself. I'm going to talk about self-compassion in a future episode because it's so important. But this is hard. But the beautiful thing is every time you notice the people-pleasing behavior, you're growing and learning. Even if you're not changing in that moment, when you recognize it, that's progress. So if this has been helpful for you, I encourage you to go back to episode 11, where I talk about setting boundaries. Setting boundaries and people-pleasing are really two sides of the same coin, and they go hand in hand. Also, if you'd like more practice, go to my website, thepurposefulmd.com, and grab my freebie. I have a free worksheet on setting boundaries that you can use, and it's been really helpful for me. I'd love to hear from you if this episode was helpful. Drop me an email at laura@thepurposefulmd.com. That's LAURA at thepurposefulmd.com. Thank you for watching The Purposeful MD on YouTube. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Please also visit www.thepurposefulmd.com for free downloads or to discuss working with me as your coach.